Hi YouTube, we're here with the L-39. We're going to do a build video here. Build should be pretty simple on this thing. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, plus a LiPo of your choice. I'm going to use Zippy Compact 60C 2200 milliamp 4S. Radio of your choice. In this case I'm using a Spectrum DX18 Gen 1. And receiver of your choice, which is going to be a Lemon RX 7 channel with stabilization. Can't highly recommend these things enough. You'll notice I've taken the Y cable out. I didn't build the little L-39 stand. I'm going to keep this foam for another project. It's nice and bendy. Did some research. Found some different pictures online like I always do for flaps. And then I found lights. I think this might be radar, but I'm not sure. And also wanted to show you these are slotted Fowler flaps too, but I don't think I'm going to be doing that on the swing. And I'm not 100% sure I'm going to be doing any flaps right away because I'm going to try flap rounds first and see if they're effective. On my F-14, it's such a complex wing setup that I didn't add rudders. On this I intend to add a rudder. So my first step is to figure out how I'm going to do that. And I think the easiest way, by the way, look at that thing, it's flimsy. My first step is going to be to go ahead and get the rudder installed. Because I want a rudder. And I want a rudder right off the bat. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut that in real quick. It needs to be cut here, 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 and here. Okay. This is not a super strong thing, so we may take a bamboo skewer and strengthen the wing in that way. Got bamboo skewers back here. These are extremely light and very strong. Whatever we do, we'll just push it in so it kind of holds things nice and square and true. And as for servos, I've got a bunch of different choices for servos, for the rudder servo. And I think I'm going to go with a real light duty one. Oh, these are my cables. Sorry, guys. This is my servos. I'm going to go with a small one, probably a 5 gram, because this thing is so light. I've got these Hextronics 5 gram servos. I actually have some that are smaller too. And I had considered maybe going with a smaller servo, which I believe they're classified as a 2.6 gram servo. But I think for now, depending on the thickness, we'll go with that. But let's just see what size they would be if we were going to go with that. It's the ones I've used for flaps before. Yeah, and they've got the smaller connectors and everything, so I'm not going to use a micro linear servo. Oh, here we go. Here's the bag of goodies. And what I've got here is, these are the kind of like the minis. Jeez, I got 2 bags that these are inside of. That's crazy. Here's one. So we'll use that as our backup plan in case this doesn't work. Okay. So we got these from Hobby King. And there's 2 different styles in this bag. And they're the same part number, but they're different packaging. Okay. So whichever one seems to meet the criteria for the thickness of the wing, that's what we're going to go with. Okay. So this one here, there's your thickness. Just ballpark. That's really close to the same thickness. I'm going to go with this because they're actually pretty cheap. These are a little bit more expensive. And they're really good, but you need to use them for a light application because they are very light duty. So I'll get the stuff put away and I'll come right back. Okay, so this is the part number for that. It's a Hextronics 5 gram servo. HXT 500. Okay, so obviously it doesn't have a long enough cable to reach all the way to the front. And then that leads to the second reason why I'm doing this now. Normally I would wait and do it after I had vetted the plane initially, but you see this little channel here? That channel is going to be inaccessible when I'm done with this. I'll be able to do flaps okay, I trust, but I won't necessarily be able to get to the back with my rudder wire. even though we have this access. Now I added this little piece of tape here so that I can lift this easier. And right now it's maybe not so bad, but wait till you have the wing on there, it's a little bit trickier. And what I did is I just taped it, and I forced down the tape just a little bit in front, and that helps it to fall back. So then you won't notice it as much. It's hard to see, I know, but that's the whole idea. And that helps you get that off because it's magnetically attached. Okay, so coming back to the rudder real quick, this would normally be a bank and yank plane. So we're not going to be doing a bank and yank, we're going to be adding in our rudder so we can make this thing turn. So the first thing I do when I'm cutting into a new plane is I usually take the opportunity to switch out blades to a very brand new fresh X-Acto blade. And I mean, honestly, on this particular plane it's probably not worthy of a new X-Acto blade, but the thing is, it's kind of like one of those where if you just put a new blade in, you'll get a lot better cuts. And you may have noticed when I pulled that blade out that the blade tip was broke off. So that will add up to frustration for you. Okay, and I'm just going to show you how easy it is to add this rudder. Okay, make sure things are relatively clean. Okay, when we're cutting, we want to cut this squarely and hope that our molded lines line up. Okay, so we're just going to do a little test here. We're just going to cut this back, just double checking that our blade is going square. We're just going to slide until we get to there, and we're going to keep it just shy of square, and then we're going to square it for the last little bit. Okay, so that wasn't a perfect cut. It's very difficult to do this exactly perfect, but the idea is you're going to widen this up here in a second anyway, so no biggie. So now I'm just taking and making a score. Okay, then I'm going to follow it back. See how much easier that is? When you have the score, the blade has a spot to ride, and so you inevitably get a better cut. Okay, so now obviously when this is all said and done, you don't want it to bind at all. Okay, so you see what I'm doing now? Just going through, and I'm actually moving the blade backward too, and I'm just cutting out a little teeny sliver of material. Okay, so you got that there, we got that there. Now we're going to put it in backward, hopefully knock that chunk out. It's not knocked out yet, but no big deal. Okay, so now a couple different ways you can do this. I'm going to do it the easy way. I'm just going to cut the surface on one side, just diving in about half the depth of the material. Okay, and then I'm going to work it just a hair. Okay, and then I'm going to cut about half the material on the other side. Now see, the red didn't line up perfectly with the seam mark on this side when they painted it with their jig, so no big deal. We'll just see how nice that broke off. That was really fancy. Okay, so now we're going to take a sanding block here, and we're just going to take a little teeny bit off. And this color should be fairly easy to match. Looks like red, white, and blue, like USA red, white, and blue. Should be fairly easy to get colors to match that. Unlike the Cirrus. Okay, so what we're looking for is just removing enough material so that we get a nice free movement. Okay. Okay, so now the other thing we're going to do is we're going to take this blade, now that we have control and we have a better view, and we're just going to go through and we're just going to cut just to clean up that edge just a hair. And the reason for cleaning up the edge just a hair like that is because it's easier to take it off with a knife and then do the finish work with the sanding block. Okay. Now obviously this thing is fairly flimsy, so that's the rationale behind putting in that stick, and it will pay dividends with strength, especially if this thing ends up on its back, which is not an impossibility by any stretch. Okay, so you see we got a little bit of gap. We should be good with that. Okay, so now we need some sort of a hinge to make that move, or to allow that to move rather. So we'll just grab out the bag of hinge material, and those hinges, those ones work real nice, but I'm not 100% sure I want the weight. But it will be a lot quicker. So in this case, we'll just use these. Okay, so you remember the Vaseline thing we did the other day when we were doing a hinge on, what plane was that? I forget which plane. Oh, it was on the Arcus M. On the Arcus M. Oh, and look, I have two different sizes of these. One's wider, one's thinner. We're going to use the thinner ones. Now, if you want to, you can actually cut these in half too. But I wouldn't highly recommend it because then your pin might fall out. So we'll just clearly be needing 2 of those. You don't need 3. Which incidentally is the way that they do them. They have 2 hinge points, if I recall, on the real thing, which is kind of cool. It's always nice when you can get a cool scale detail in there. Now, as you can probably imagine, we're not going to be doing flaps today for the Maiden. Like I said, we're going to try to get the split flaps to do what we need, or the flap-arounds to do what we need. Okay, so these things have this little pin in there. Okay, so make sure the pin's down, push tight, and then make sure that your pin goes up so it has no possibility of falling out, or very, very limited. Okay, so we'll just find the middle. We'll make a slice. Okay, now why are you doing this first, you say? Well, because if I do this first, I'm going to know where I can set my balsa wood support. If I do this second, then I might hit it. Got to have the material removed before you can add the strengthening portion. Okay. And it's so much easier when you use a new blade, and those things are really fairly economical, so do it if you can. If you can afford it, do it. Okay, right in the middle, dive it in. Okay, got a little wiggle on that cut. I don't like that, but it'll be fine. It'll hold on to the thing nicely. Okay, alright, so now we can take and we need to basically take and now figure out where we need to cut on this side. So just because this is a blue piece, and this marker's kind of dark, I'm wondering if I have a lighter blue. I wonder if this is lighter. Well, why don't we just use this in this case? So I'm just going to set this in here so it's right where the hinge is going to be. Top and bottom marks. Okay, just like that. Real simple. Slice it, then use that already sliced out portion to get the blade in there. Okay. This is not a real hard process, guys. It's just more a matter of being patient, trying to get it right. Try not to stab yourself while you're doing it. If you can avoid that, that'd be good. Okay, so now we have to decide if we need to take off material to make room for clearance. That's why we're dry fitting everything. Takes a little bit longer if you dry fit it, but it's definitely worth the effort. Okay. Okay, so we've got it nice and close to where we think we want it. Okay, so that's like kind of the position I want it in. But as you can see, we have a real limited amount of stroke on there. And that's because we haven't removed any material here or removed material here. But what I'm going to do, instead of removing material, I'm just going to extend the rudder out a little bit. So it's actually a little bit longer, but you're not going to know that from seeing it. You might know it from building it. And I'm noticing this spot needs trimmed a little bit, so I'm trimming that. Okay, so there we go. So now let's see if we're hitting anywhere. See, and you can see we have quite a bit of deflection, but I still think I could probably get a little bit more if I'd pull it out just a hair more. There we go. You know, honestly, we're probably not going to need that much deflection anyway. Let's just do that. Okay, good enough. So now on this plane, I would normally not use CA on a hinge like this, but I am going to go ahead and use CA for speed reasons, but also, whoops, I'm going to use CA because well, it's mostly for speed. Okay, so my first step is take my foam safe CA, make sure the tip's clear, which it is. Lay this out of the way for now. Out of the way somewhere where it's not going to fall. Okay, so that's not going to fall there. Okay, so then I need to take this Vaseline, take a Q-tip, and just get a little teeny bit. It doesn't need, you don't need that much. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this hinge all the way. Okay? And I'm going to just work up and down the length of it. Okay? Just like so. You kind of want to slather it on there fairly thick, but you still don't need that much to slather it on thick, is what I mean by that earlier. Okay? Okay, so CA, we have thin and we have medium. We're going to use medium in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and take the bottle and reluctantly squeeze this into the crack a little bit. Okay? So it's just sitting on the top. And then I'm going to take kicker, and yes, I know this could cause problems, but I'm going to put a little kicker on there. That's why you dry fit, okay? Shake it off. Here goes nothing, guys. Push it in quick, get it where it needs to be, and don't screw with it any more than you have to. Let it set for a second, and then you have to give it a second to work, and then make sure, just don't move it, because if you got a little CA in there, at this point, just let it set up totally, and then you can move it and it'll break free. Which is hard to resist for people like me. I just want to try to move it right away to try to free it up. Well, the problem is the glue will work in worse if it is. Okay? So a little bit on there and a little bit on here. And this stuff will lubricate this joint. Not that it matters. You probably don't need to lubricate your plastic too much. Okay. Now the reason for putting the kicker on the tip is so that I can just keep it on the tip only. Okay. Now I got to get this in here fairly quick. Okay, it's in there. So now we've got that in there. Let's go ahead and make sure we don't have any of this petroleum jelly anywhere. That bounced out of the garbage can, didn't it? Yes, it did. Okay, so now my next step, now that that's had a chance to set up for a second, we're going to go ahead and just verify that things are free, which they are. And then we're going to go ahead and do the other side, but we're going to do it without kicker probably on this one. Okay, and this time I'm going to put a drip in each of these holes. And the rationale behind that is so that the CA will get some better purchase into the inside of the foam. So push it in. Now no CA, no kicker this time, okay? Okay? Just like that, guys. And then do your fine-tune adjustments as much as you can right now, okay? Remember, we want that gap. That gap's going to give us some more freedom. Gosh, that thing is so light. Okay, so that's obviously working. It's free. And just making sure nothing's free or nothing needs to be re-glued. Now we're going to take 20,000 shim, which you could use just like a thin screwdriver or something. We're going to take a torch, just a small torch, making sure I don't have anything above it. Get it cooking. Heat up the middle just a little bit. We don't want to heat it a lot. We want a little bit of heat, okay? Only a little bit. Now we're going to ride it in there and just open up that opening. And then we're going to ride it in here and open up this opening. See how it's just barely any heat, so it's not even hardly melting yet. But the idea is that'll take off those little fibrous rough cuts. Okay, let it sit for a second. Okay, go to it. Very good. And if you're not sure, start on a cool spot like over here and then work it into the hot spot. Okay? Very good. Then we get this put away. Hold on a second. I don't like spiders. Okay. So that's good. We got good freedom. We got a little bit of glue that got in the top joint, just a hair of. Okay. Now we need to make the servo do its magic. So better get this capped off. Put this out of the way. At this point, we could go ahead and bind our radio to our receiver. GX18's coming on. System setup, yes. Model select, add new model. Create. Model name. It's Acro's the default. We're going to change this to L-39. And this is called an Albatros. Okay, I'm going to pause it. I'll come back when that's done. Okay, so it says Albatros, L-39 Albatros. Okay, so we can go back. Aircraft type, we already know. We're going to set this up initially as flaperons with a normal tail. Then we're going to change our picture to something that looks commensurate, which is probably going to be, if I recall, there isn't really a good jet picture. There might be an F-16 in here. And of course you wouldn't have to. Oh, there we go. That's pretty close. Close enough for what we're doing. Okay, so now we're into the Albatros setup. And we want to first set up throttle cut, switch H. Throttle cut's more of just getting used to it sort of thing. Okay, so that's set right. Timer, I'm going to set it to 4 minutes with a tone and vibrate with a 1 out. So start it, it runs. Okay, clear, resets it. Awesome. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to bind our transmitter to our dealy bop. Okay, right here we have a battery and we have an ESC that we can use to energize this, or you could just use the one from the plane if you want. I don't really care what direction you do it. Not that big a deal one way or another. But at some point, you know, we'll be hooking that up. At this point, we'll just use this because this is just the quick get it done. Now remember guys, this is stabilization, not stabilization plus. I do not like the stabilization plus. It doesn't auto level well and it takes longer to start. Okay, so we're going to put in the blind plug, which is over here. In case you're not familiar with the Lemon RX receivers, we have gain adjustments. The master gain will be controlled by our auxiliary switch up here for auxiliary 3, I believe. And basically we're going to turn on flaperons and all these other good things, but for now we can bind it. Radio is off. Let's go ahead and plug this in first. The negative goes down, so we'll plug into throttle here. And the reason we're doing this is so that our servo can get centered for the rudder as we build the rudder. Okay, here's the rudder. Signal goes up. Okay, this is off. Bind plug's plugged in. Okay, everything's turned on. Bind plug's held. Flashy lights. Turning it on. Okay, DSM X 22 milliseconds. Very good. You can hear it moving. Okay, so we're good there. Now let's go ahead and get this set up. We're going to use the simplest one in here, which is right here. Now it doesn't really matter which way you go with it, but if you had some restriction, like you're trying to tie the same output to a nose gear or something like that, you could get that worked out now. Actually, probably would rather do it so that I don't know. Actually, I want it the other way. Excuse me. So if we do this, then that gets that real down to the bottom, real far down. Okay, so you see how that's going to be moving at a bit of an angle? We want this to move at a bit of an angle together, so we're going to make it so it's like 90 degrees of one another. Just making sure that didn't break. Okay, it didn't break. It just must have had a little CA that's set up. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, and remember we got that piece of plastic in here from the tab on the hinge, so we're going to want to be just below that or just above it. I don't want to go that high, so we'll go right there. Okay, so the other thing too is at this point we could probably go ahead and shut off the radio system now that we have that centered. But we'll be screwing with this for a few minutes, so we'll leave it on for just this second. Okay, so now the first thing we're going to do, get that where we want it, move it, make sure we don't see anything else that's going to cause problems. Ooh, we need to get out to the thicker part of the wing too, that's true. Okay, so that's where that's going to go. Okay, so I'm just going to start tracing it with the knife very neatly. I'm going to open up the whole packet here. Now remember, this wing is not very thick, so you're probably going to end up cutting all the way through this wing, which is fine. So just plan on it, okay? Knife blade going against the cable. Got to be careful there. Okay, so just double checking my positioning of the knife before I start this. This is one of those critical spots on the cut where you're going to end up having trouble getting it right if you screwed up. Okay, so we can see all our marks there. So now at this point I'm probably just going to cut all the way through and just be done with it. And I'll keep the plug. And once you keep the plug, then you can always try to put the plug back in if you don't like the way this works out, but that would be better to avoid if you can. Cut it a little bit tighter than you think you need. You can always increase the size. You can't make it smaller though. Not easy, at least. And you see I picked that panel line just to make sure with certainty we're going to be able to use this. Okay, get your fingers out from behind it so you don't cut your fingers from the backside. Okay, alright, there we go. Okay, let's see if it pops out, which would be nice if it did. Doesn't look like we got it totally perfectly scored all the way through on all the spots, but we got most of them, so I can trace. Just get that last little bit cut. Sorry if I came out of frame there for a second, guys. You don't want to totally destroy your rudder, so be very careful on this step. This is a scary step. Okay, so we got it out of there. And you're probably thinking to yourself, geez, Brian, you're taking a whole lot of material out of that plane. Yes, I am. I don't really see a way to do it without. If you want a rudder, that is. Just don't screw up. Okay, so now you can see how that's going to work. That's going to basically drop in there, except it's going to drop in all the way. Now we just got to figure out how we're going to handle this cable, which, are you kidding me? Oh, I thought there was a cut in the cable. There's not. It was a piece of debris. That's good. Okay, so now at this point we can go ahead and unplug this, shut this off, lay this aside for the moment. We can come back to that in a little bit. So now basically we need to make a channel for this wire to exit from the wing to a useful area. Now remember, on this airplane we've got the EDF here, And remember, we want to keep this unglued up at the front. So if we can chase down to where it's going to be covered by the horizontal stabilizer, like so. Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so if you can get that wire to come out here somewhere, that'd be best. But you'll want to be sparing in how much material you remove. Okay? And you want the orange to be sticking out. It's going to be easier to cover that orange up. Okay? The red's not going to be hard at all to hide. So maybe we'll go right up against the orange. Okay, so we'll just cut at a 45 degree angle here. Chase down to where that nearest seam line is. Now make a plug out of that by taking your knife at the end and just lifting. Okay. So that peels out a little plug for you. Cut down a little bit deeper than you think you need. Okay, so now remember that wire doesn't come out the side, it comes out the middle. Okay, the middle of the body of the servo. Okay, so as you can see, that servo is pretty well hidden now, except for the control arm, of course, which we have not put the screw in yet, so we should probably go ahead and throw the screw in there. It's the smallest screw. There's 3 screws in that package, if you happen to use the same servo I'm using.